Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at the 11th Halifax International Security Forum in Nova Scotia, Canada, one of the world's truly great security forums. Our coverage here is sponsored by Boeing and Leonardo DRS, and it's my honor to be talking to the founder and the head of the Halifax International Security Forum, Peter Van Praagh. Peter, extraordinary conference as usual. You guys really do have something incredibly unique here.
Vago, thank you so much. I really appreciate seeing you here every year. In fact, when I see you, I know that the conference is about to begin and that we're really in the throes of it. And I hope you had a good weekend. It's Sunday morning now, and there's been a lot to think about, a lot to digest intellectually over the course of the weekend. You know, Vago, this conference is different than other conferences because this is the good guys club. This is where people come to Canada. The Canadians have a large delegation, of course, but the largest delegation is really the Americans, and we were really happy this year to have a very strong congressional delegation, to have the United States Secretary of the Navy, and to have President Trump's National Security Advisor, Ambassador Robert O'Brien, with us, as well as people who are committed to freedom and democracy from over 80 countries. So it was a good event, and you know, I like to say that we'd like to put ourselves out of business, but there's a lot of things to do with regard to global security, so we'll be back next year.
You know, absolutely, and you know, one of the things is, you know, how much care and thought go into how you guys pick topics. The videos themselves are actually award-winning and stand on their own. You know, you don't understand why, like, Bob Ross is painting for a while, and then you realize, like, it's about the Arctic. Talk to us a little bit, but you became very, very emotional, and I think everybody became very emotional in that first video about the Hong Kong demonstrators, and you were talking about the importance of freedom. Talk to us about why it was, you know, you guys always have a big field to choose from, but you guys always work really, really hard, particularly for the McCain Prize named for the late Senator John McCain, which Cindy McCain awards every year. Why the folks in Hong Kong?
Vago, as I said in my opening remarks, the struggle for freedom, well, freedom itself and the struggle for freedom is not a new idea. This is an idea, frankly, that is as old as time. And what we were watching on the streets of Hong Kong is a very reasonable request for the Chinese government to live up to its obligations, its stated obligations. And those people who are requesting it have no choice but to request it loudly. And the international community needs to support the people of Hong Kong. The international community needs to really send a signal to Beijing that what the people of Hong Kong are requesting is not unreasonable. And the people who are writing about this and doing their best to support need to really take the side of the Hong Kong protesters. There is no moral equivalence on this issue between the protesters and the police who are wearing armor and using live ammunition. And everybody needs to understand that this is the moment. I was really happy to have Republican and Democratic members of Congress who signed on to the Hong Kong Human Rights Act last week. And this is something that the United States is, through its representatives in Congress, is very clear about.
I think you even heard Nick Schifrin did a tremendous job moderating that discussion with Ambassador O'Brien. Ambassador O'Brien made it clear that it passed unanimously in the Senate. It passed with only one dissenting vote in the United States House of Representatives, and that it will have the force of law whether the president decides to sign it or not. Although that sends a troubling signal. Time and again, it's increasingly Canada that's standing up. The Chinese ambassador to Canada was extremely angry yesterday with your decision to award this. All eyes are now on the Parliament, whether or not that's going to pass here in Canada and elsewhere around the world. How do you think this issue is going to play out at the end of the day?
Well, how this issue plays out really is up to the international community. I believe that the Beijing has a problem here. Hong Kong is a financial center. It is the face. It is the international face of China. And so those are positive elements for the Chinese regime in Beijing. But at the same time, it has people on the streets protesting, and the Chinese government, like authoritarian governments everywhere, really have one natural reaction to people protesting, and that's to squash them. And squash them is a term that suggests takes away the humanity. These are human beings. And as Emily Lau said, please, to the international community, please, please don't let Hong Kong streets be overflowed with blood, because that is potentially the decision that Beijing is considering right now, which is going in with brute force, and that we could have another Tiananmen Square. We had a lot of good news in 1989 in Europe with the fall of the Berlin Wall, but people might not remember that 1989 was the same year that protesters in Tiananmen Square were killed.
Let me ask 2 more questions, because I think you're about to get the hook. And you know,
I got nothing more important to do than this.
Thank you very much. That's very kind, Peter. But I know how busy you are. And I think, you know, each year, by the way, the theme, the pencils were really, really great. Present, not permanent. And it's even because it's a pencil. A pencil's never permanent, right?
That.
Very, very clever. I did. You guys are very clever, Pierre.
Yeah.
Let me ask you.
Subtlety's lost on Twitter, I found out this weekend.
Yeah, well, that's for sure. But that's a different conversation. We'll have you on the podcast. We can talk about subtlety at that point. Let me ask you though: is there a problem and a danger when the United States, the American president, is not speaking as forcefully? I mean, again, as we were meeting here, this extraordinary piece of legislation passed. And yet, it was the President of the United States who wasn't endorsing it. And increasingly, it's Canada that's standing up for that voice of freedom around the world. But the Canadians readily admit, we're a small country, we're not the United States. And we're better and stronger if we're together. Is there a problem when the United States does not speak with a clearer and more forceful voice at this from the very top?
Vago, of course everybody would like to see the United States talk forcefully about human rights and democracy around the world. I mean, everybody, but America, I like to say, is more than a country. We shouldn't forget that it's a country, and that country has to be governed. And that's very important, because that's the responsibility of elected officials. But around the world, America is an idea. And that idea of freedom and dignity for individuals has taken root around the world because of America's success. Our opening panel this year, Vago, was called Revolutions of Our Time, Freedom Without Us. It's a play on words, freedom without the United States. The truth is, Vago, people in Hong Kong, people in Venezuela, people in Sudan, people in Bolivia, people all around the world demand freedom and dignity. And they're not waiting for American rhetoric. Okay, the world is, it seems as though democracy is on its back foot, and it's the idea of yesterday. Freedom and democracy is never the idea of yesterday. It is always the idea of tomorrow. And we are seeing around the world demands for freedom and democracy, and the United States is with the program. And if they're not fully committed to the program, they will be, because it makes good politics as well.
You know, it was also incredibly moving when you, in that opening video, to see those kids in Hong Kong carrying American flags.
Yes.
And there's, it's just was, it brought tears to my eyes.
With Bruce Springsteen cheering them on, yeah.
Absolutely. Let me ask you about the China initiative you guys are putting together. Every year, China has been looming larger and larger and larger in the face of this conference. And you announced a very, very ambitious program over the next year, so that by the time we reconvene in 2020, there's going to be a roadmap. Secretary Spencer, Secretary of the United States Navy, mentioned how important that is, because I asked him the question, at what point do we actually need a global integrated strategy in this case? Talk to us a little bit about that effort, how you guys are going to go about it, and what do you hope to achieve?
Yeah, it's late for an integrated strategy for the United States and its allies, but it's not too late. And so we're going to do what we can to contribute to the conversation and put pen to paper and present something like you said. And when we present it, it'll be just 2 weeks after the U.S. presidential election next year. So what we're going to do is we're going to put together a team of experts, but it's going to require more than experts. It's going to require talking to people in industry. It's going to require talking to people in the United States, in Canada, in East Asia, of course, but also in Europe. The issues related to China are not limited to China's neighbors. It's not limited to people who have a Pacific coastline. Issues related to China are global. And so with American leadership, and I do emphasize that that will be vital, with American leadership, I think that we can get a community of democratic nations, should we produce a good paper, to sign on to something that can maybe reignite some optimism in our own ability to defend democracy worldwide.
Peter Van Praagh, the director of the extraordinary Halifax International Security Forum every year up here in Nova Scotia. I want to personally thank you, personally thank your team. They're extraordinary. They do tremendous work. Thanks so much for having us. And by the way, excellent tie. Your daughter has tremendous taste.
Vago, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And you've got a nice tie as well. Thank you.